So this will be a disruptive session. First of all, who knows what FERC is? Oh, good. All right, excellent. Well, you're going to learn some more things besides that. We have three very accomplished CDOs here with us today. Let me start off in the middle, introduce Kirsten Dalboe, who is 4 years now at FERC. Exactly, and she keeps saying, but does that mean I'm done?
Have I expired?
You have not. You absolutely have not. She was named the CDO of the Year last year, so congratulations for that. That's a wonderful accomplishment. Katherine Tom, who is freshly minted at the Federal Reserve Bank. Right? I couldn't resist, right, exactly. But also comes from the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, so it's not a matter of inexperience. This is your third time as a CDO, if I remember?
No, still
Second.
First time. With the title.
With the
yes,
title,
first
well.
time.
So you all get, we don't need to be called CDOs to be CDOs. It's the top data job in the organization. That is the answer to it. So you've been leading data stuff for a long time in that sense. And Adita, who has been in and about and has a varied career, but now is leading the Deloitte CDO practice for Washington, D.C. And with that, I will get out of the way and let these guys take over.
Yeah.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Exciting couple of days here at the Symposium. I'm always energized to see everybody in person, get to read network and build connections again. So lovely to see a lot of familiar faces in the audience today. Thank you for joining us on the last day of the Symposium. I couldn't be more excited to be hosting this session right now with some very, very accomplished colleagues and women in data. I'm Adita Karkera. Quick introduction about myself. As Peter pointed out, I'm the Chief Data Officer for Deloitte's Government and Public Services. Not new to the public sector spectrum. I've spent 21 years directly serving the government, the state of Arkansas, before I moved over to industry, and now in the current role for the CDO for Deloitte's government practice. Excited to be leading this panel. My co-moderator, Ren Essene, had a medical emergency and was not able to join us. And Ren, if you're listening to us virtually, we are missing you. She's been taken a key role as we planned this session out, and so we definitely miss her. But with that, I want to pass it over to my accomplished colleagues here and let them give a little bit of background about themselves, maybe also talk a little bit about what FERC is, as Peter talked about it a little bit earlier, but maybe give a little background about the organization and tell us what your mission for the organization is. So Kirsten, if may I start with you?
Sure, and I think we were also going to throw in like our favorite thing about Boston.
Yes, thank you. More coffee, please.
I guess I was going to just share, to share my history. So my favorite thing about Boston, and if I stretch that a little bit to Somerville and Medford, I am a graduate of Tufts University. So that is probably my favorite thing about the area.
Love it.
So I have a bachelor's of science in engineering. I thought I was going to be a civil engineer, and then decided that as much as I loved the idea of building things and I loved the math around that and the data around that, I didn't really want to rappel off of buildings and bridges. So I kind of found the world of systems engineering. So my first job was with SAIC doing Navy contract mine warfare countermeasures. But that was in 2003 or so. It was a very heavy data project, but no one called it that at the time. But pulling in environmental data, intelligence data, geographic data, all that kind of stuff to determine tactically similar regions to help the Navy figure out the likelihood of mines being in certain bodies of water to help them remove it. But it got me really interested in the world of technology and data. So I guess then I moved on. I did some, I've always been in the DC area other than my time here going to school. And so I did some time doing USAID contracting. I did some time at the Office of Comptroller of the Currency doing contracting work there. I got my master's degree at George Mason in technology management. And then when I got that degree, I moved over to consulting for the Department of Homeland Security. So that's how I found my way over to DHS. I ended up becoming a federal employee, which had not been a grand life plan of mine, but I just had an opportunity and really liked the work that we were doing there at DHS. There were some phenomenal people there at the time. And so I came into that space more doing enterprise system development type work. And then the undersecretary at the time, around 2010, 2012, asked for a dashboard project, basically trying to bring together all of that sort of back office mission support data. So you know, HR data, financial data, contracts data, IT data, security data, all of that stuff. You know, we want that one single pane of glass to be able to report off of that. Because when the secretary would look at numbers and say, okay, how many people in dollars do we have at the department, and the numbers mismatch because the CFO and the Chico reported different numbers, that is a bad thing. So I was asked to kind of help step in, created a big executive steering committee, brought people together. We defined 60 term definitions to say we need to have common definitions about how we're going to define these things, because otherwise we accrue too much risk. We have data quality issues. We need to make sure that we're understanding these things consistently. So I ended up, through my time at DHS, I was the inaugural program manager for a program called the DHS Management Cube. It still exists today, and in some ways that feels like a great accomplishment, that even after I've been gone from DHS for, 6-7 years now, the program still exists. So that feels like a huge accomplishment. When I left DHS, I was the director of the Enterprise Data Management Office and the chief data architect there. So that was before the title of CDO existed, but I was, I guess, generally doing that role without the title. Around 2017, I went over to the Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General. I was the director of data operations there, standing up a cloud platform. That is a very interesting mission there. I think many people don't realize that the Department of Health and Human Services has the largest budget of all federal agencies. You think of DoD, but really HHS has the largest budget, $1.7 trillion. And if you're in the oversight space, there's a lot of opportunity for waste, fraud, and abuse in there, and that is a huge data challenge. So that was a very fascinating place to work at. I was there for about 2.5 years to get our foot into the door in the cloud, start figuring out how we were going to bring in these huge volumes of data around Medicare and Medicaid data, to help all of the data scientists try to find that needle in the haystack where that bad behavior was happening, so that we could bring that money back to the U.S. Treasury. And then in 2019, so yes, just I think last week I passed my 4-year mark at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So I am the first chief data officer there at FERC, and that's been an interesting and fun time. So yes, what is FERC? So FERC's mission is economically efficient, safe, reliable, and secure energy for consumers. So we are considered, compared to DHS, which is a large cabinet agency, HHS also a large cabinet agency, FERC is an independent regulatory agency. We are not actually part of the Department of Energy. That's important to know. A lot of people think we're part of DOE. We are not. We are separate from them for independence reasons, since we're regulating the industry. We only have about 1,400 to 1,500 people on staff. So it's a pretty small agency in comparison to being in a place like DHS or HHS. But really, you know, everything that we do, I believe, obviously I'm biased in the world of data, but everything we do is related to data. You know, so we're, obviously we have a lot of statutory obligations, so there's a lot of data that we track just to make sure that as things come in, orders, requests come in from the public, we're meeting our 30-day, 60-day, 90-day responsibilities. Mm-hmm. We don't want to miss a last data act and decision on a statutory matter, so we have to make sure that we're tracking that very closely. And that becomes a data governance challenge in terms of making sure we have good definitions around all of these dates so we don't inadvertently miss one of those dates. There's obviously all the, you know, HR financial contracts type data, and then a lot of just what we would call mission data. So we have about 115 information collections coming in from our regulated entities. That is also a fascinating challenge in the data world, because that means that the bulk of our data is coming externally. So in terms of data integrity, we need to make sure that we always maintain the version of the data as it came into us. Even if we know that data has quality issues, we have to always make sure that we have that immutable version of the data for integrity reasons. Then as we do analytics on it, we do our transformations and all that kind of stuff, we always have to have strong provenance and lineage back to the way in which we received the data originally, so that we can always show our work. And that's a really important concept, of course. And interesting, I think, in the data space, where when I know a lot of places will talk about data quality and sort of say, okay, well, if you find the quality issue, go fix it at the source. Well, I can't do that. I can't risk, you know, changing what a regulated entity sent me. But I need to show the work that, like, okay, we can make an assumption that this was actually sent to us incorrectly, and we've made that transformation over here, but I can still trace it back to how I received it. But we do a lot of really interesting data work, just in terms of monitoring the financial markets. There's obviously a lot of a lot of financial data around the energy space, trading. We want to prevent sort of future Enron type behavior, so we do a lot of fraud analytics, looking for whether anyone's trying to game the markets. We're doing a lot of environmental justice analysis. We have on staff like biologists and fishery specialists and things like that, because if someone wants to build a new dam, it needs FERC approval. We have to assess environmental conditions to see environmentally what those impacts are. There's also now a big push around environmental justice analysis to determine if any of the projects that FERC has oversight over have impacts to marginalized communities, things like that. So there's a lot of stuff that we do, and we're only a 1,500 person organization. And my staff, I only have a staff of 10, so a lot of what I do is really building out sort of a data stewardship framework to make sure that I have the right connections into our program offices, and I'm helping all of the economists, statisticians, energy industry analysts across the organization use the tools that are available to them and follow a consistent methodology around all of that. So I could probably keep talking. I'll stop there.
It's a sign of somebody who's so passionate about it.
So passionate, and when we said, these are some very accomplished women, I was not kidding. I was not kidding. Thank you for that background, Kirsten. Katherine, if I may pass it over to you.
Thanks. Well, let me go to the other side. Who has not heard about Federal Reserve? Well, then I can skip that. The introduction of what Federal Reserve is. I'm Katherine Tom, Chief Data Officer at the Federal Reserve Board. My journey to where I am, it's a half a journey. Half of my journey was in the private sector. That's my first half of my career in various consulting areas, including Deloitte. Then Freddie Mac, when it was actually a purely private entity. Then I joined OCC, Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, and then to the board. I've been at the board for about almost 5 years and almost 3 years as a CDO. So I think, a lot of people talk about CDO tenure, 2 to 3 years. I think that's the one. So I know my clock is ticking. It hasn't expired yet, but clock is ticking. And what else do I need to talk about? Self-introduction?
Anything you want to highlight about your favorite part of Boston?
Oh, Boston. I love Boston. I love this town. Been here many, many times, actually. Well, a little bit more background. I actually grew up in China. And so I came here for graduate school, and my first stop is not Boston, a little bit north, Durham, New Hampshire. So Boston is my favorite hangout place on weekends, and so my favorite thing, if I have to think of one thing, I think I had the best steamers here, a little bit south of the train station. I can't remember the place, but that's the best place to be.
Awesome. Thank you, Katherine. As you heard from all that introduction, these women have been really trailblazers in their field, and I couldn't be more proud to be sitting here and moderating this session with them. As you notice, the header for this session was Empowered CDO and Government, but also want to just bring the focus that we deliberately made this a women session, just to continue to highlight all the amazing things that are being done. There are phenomenal leaders that are in really high spots in the government today that are females, but we need so many more. So this is just an attempt to continue to highlight some of the amazing work being led by females and continue to help give inspiration to others in the industry to continue to follow on their steps. Okay, so pivoting now to the role of the CDO, especially in government, and I see in the audience it's quite a good mix of commercial and government here. So I wonder if we can start off with, in 2018, the Foundations for the Evidence-Based Policymaking Act is what mandated the role of the CDO for government agencies. I wonder if we can start off there and kind of get you all's perspective on how the Evidence Act impacted the creation of the role for your organization and what that means to you. Because as I talk to other CDOs in the government space, and myself included, because when I was setting up the Office of the CDO for the state of Arkansas in 2017, we didn't really have much guidelines on, what is expected of the role. Is there a certain framework to follow? Was there a book to follow for setting up the Office of the CDO? There wasn't any. So we learned over the years, right? So I wondered, what that meant to each of your organization, how the role of the CDO is situated operationally, and what your specific roles and responsibilities are. And Katherine, maybe we start with you.
So at the Federal Reserve, we actually had a CDO position 5 years before the law came out. So it's not a new thing anymore. And also, for those of you who's not familiar with the Evidence Act, which Open Government Data Act is part of it, we call it the short term, we love our acronyms, OGDA. It's part of it. It has two parts when it comes to federal data, just a quick recap of that. One part is about the organization, about the role in terms of every agency has to have a CDO. And we have to have a data governance body. And CDO is in charge of, is responsible for data management throughout its life cycle. So that's one portion on the organization, on the role. The other half is about open data, make data available to the public as much as, regulation, confidentiality allowed. And also, make data available in machine-readable format, engage the public. So there are two big parts of it. Because we already had a CDO job, I had two predecessors before me at the Federal Reserve. We already had that position in place. We had the Board Data Council, the governance body in place. We had an office. I have an office about 40 plus people, in looking at various things associated with data, on data collection, even managing some of the data and data governance and metadata, et cetera. So, so that portion, the impact to the Fed is not that much. We don't have to change a lot of it to meet the regulatory requirements. Now, open data, and we also actually at the Federal Reserve, for those of you who don't know, in addition to our policy work, in addition to bank supervision, we actually publish a lot of data. And we actually have a data page on our website. And so the open data portion, we have already started. Now, what can I do with the law? Now the law is in place. It definitely helps us to clear out some of the confusions on our soul searching. So what does CDO do? What kind of value you bring in? On the other hand, my personal view, so I did a little bit of my soul searching with that law. That is, do I just want to waive the law to say, oh, everybody, you got to just comply with it. The law says this, so you're going to have to do it. Or do I do something else? My take on it, I don't want to become that defensive CDO. I want to be the offensive side, which is, I want to do something meaningful and even sometimes something fun. And so, so the law is there to help us to make some clarification. It does give me the authority to actually oversee the data management lifecycle here at the board. But most importantly, it does not give me the buy-ins of our stakeholders. So it helps me to start the conversation. And how I gear that conversation through, it is up to the CDO role, it's up to the business. So, so in a way, the law helps, but I think, as a CDO, I like to think we'll go beyond what the law asks us to do.
Sure. Katherine, can you also talk a little bit about what your team looks like and how are you situated operationally in the organization? Because every time I talk to a CDO in the federal space, it's a different answer. So let's hear your perspective.
Everybody's different. At the Federal Reserve, I report to our Chief Operating Officer. And our COO reports to our chair and our administrative governor directly. So, so it's, from the onset, it's part of the business operations, right? So CDO, CIO, and CFO, and CRO, the Chief Risk Officer, we all report to our COO directly. Gotcha. So that's, and as mentioned, my team, I have 40 plus people right now. We cover information collection clearance. For those of you who know a little bit about the public sector, there's a Paper Reduction Act we got to be comply with. So that's one portion of our job. We focus on data governance, metadata management, data inventory, knowledge about data, education about data. So that's another portion of my team. We also have, a couple of my managers are here. Another one managing our board data platform. It doesn't cover all the board data, but it has a significant amount of data that we're managing day in, day out. Then I also have a team who's also actually focusing on the innovative portion of the data, which is what are the data capabilities, new ones that we can bring in, such as cloud adoption or any other new things about data.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And of course, there's not like a magic one-size-fits-all model that works for all CDO organizations. But Kirsten, how about FERC?
Right. So FERC, so the Evidence Act came to be, January of 2019. But FERC had already had plans to hire a CDO, so to some degree that was good news for me in the sense that there was already leadership support for the role. They weren't being sort of forced to create the CDO position because the Evidence Act told them to. They already had that in the plans, but the timing of it was such that I ended up being hired in July of 2019. So there was, I was hired about 5 months after the Evidence Act came to be, which I really liked the way Katherine put that in terms of the Evidence Act is helpful in starting the conversation. Yeah. I will say particularly as the first CDO at FERC, where I got a lot of questions about why are you here? Why do we need you? Weren't we doing fine without this? We were already working with data. And I could say absolutely you've been doing fantastically. However, the law is requiring us to do these things because this will help us mature our practices, and I'm here to support that. I did definitely get asked the question whether I was here to take all their data, and I had to say absolutely not. In fact, my goal is to help empower you further with the data you have and help you find the data we already have in more effective manners. So in terms of how FERC is set up, I mean, right, it was good that that leadership had already decided that we wanted a CDO, and that those plans were already moving forward, because I do know some of the agencies that had not had those plans were much slower moving in terms of how they would establish it. And I was glad that FERC was sort of on the forward side of that in terms of how we would set things up. In terms of where I sit in the organization, so I actually do report to the CIO. And in terms of FERC, because we're a small organization, the way that we're set up and the way that our budget operates, I would actually say that our budget is probably the cleanest in terms of how it's sort of distributed across an organization as compared to what I've seen at like DHS. I mean, if you read the DHS Congressional Justification, it's thousands of pages long and difficult to comprehend, but at a smaller agency, it's a pretty simple, we have salaries and benefits, we have rent, and we have technology. And so to some degree, it made the most sense to put the CDO role with the CIO because that was where the resources were. And it would have been a very significant change in how the whole agency operates had CDO not been part of CIO. If the CDO had not been part of CIO, there would have been effectively no budget line for it at all. So at least by being in CIO, there is budget access, and that allowed me to fit more seamlessly into existing organizational structures. So that has helped a lot. I will also say in terms of how my team is organized, yes, I have an information collections team with the Paperwork Reduction Act. I don't know how many people are privileged to know about the Paperwork Reduction Act, but for those of you who do not know, the government is not allowed to collect any data from the public without going through a paperwork reduction process, which basically means that we have to do a burden assessment on any potential data we intend to ask of the public. We have to do an assessment of how much burden we believe it will impose on the public. If you've ever done your taxes, which I hope many of you have, there is a Paperwork Reduction Act statement on it that will say that the IRS has determined that they believe this 1040 form will take you X number of hours at this cost. So we have to go through that for every single information collection, and then it has to go through an approval with the Office of Management and Budget. That process can take 12 to 18 months. Oh, we also have to have 2 public comment periods. So we also have to put it out for public comment to tell the public that we intend to collect this data and ask the public for comment around that. So that is quite a long and laborious process. And so we have to have teams of people managing this because of this process of doing the burden assessment, creating the public comment statements, assessing the public comments that come in, potentially changing how we intend to collect the data. and then actually getting approval from OMB, having the negotiations and conversations with OMB about that. So I have a whole team around just the information collections process. And then I also have what I call currently my data management branch. And we are heavy followers of the Agile practices. And so I have 4 Agile teams within my data management branch. We've gotten kind of cute with the titles of our Agile teams because we started using these cooking analogies and trying to explain what we were building. So I have a team kitchen that is building out the data infrastructure in the cloud, in the Azure cloud environment. I have a team groceries that is automating all of our data pipelines. I have a team pantry that is my data governance and stewardship, metadata team, cataloging team, so basically organizing everything that comes in. And then I have a team cake, and so they are basically my analytics team. So building out the analytics that people want. It feels very silly, but it has actually really helped people understand what it is that we're doing. Also helped people understand the breadth of the work across the data space. I think we've heard through many of these sessions today that people tend to often just think about, well, I need like a business intelligence dashboard, or I need some analytics done, but you can't really do that without having a platform in place and the data pipelines and the data governance and stewardship around that for the tagging and the metadata to be able to actually do anything with the data. So it has really helped people understand what that full life cycle looks like. So that is how my team is structured.
Oh, I love that. Like nothing like having fun while you're doing all the data work, right? Kitchen, groceries, and whatnot, and baking the cake. Love that. Let me pivot back to a little bit about how, you talked about the federal data strategy is kind of helping you move forward with, solidifying the role of the CDO and not at the same time just not doing things for just checking off a box, right? Mm-hmm. And we face that a lot when we talk about governance, especially when you're talking about the mix of data that you all are dealing with. What are some of the key governance strategies that you've found successful in your roles?
Go ahead.
Yeah, in thinking about this question, what comes to mind really is chief data officers are change makers, and data governance is basically about organizational change. One thing I think is very interesting about government, and this probably has drawn me to government, is the idea that government is intentionally designed in a way that really gives no one person power. We don't have generally a CEO that just can say, make it happen, go do it. The way that our budget is passed out, the way our appropriation law works, there are different lines and different decision paths for things. So intentionally, that distributed decision-making practice happens, but that means that governance becomes more challenging and becomes more about that organizational change. And decision-making is really very much about relationships and coalition building and that kind of thing. So to me, governance, there's a lot of just organizational change and relationship building that happens in the governance process.
Kirsten, I know when we were talking about this, and Katherine, both of you, I think you all mentioned you have some sort of a data governance board in place that I believe you're the chair for in your organization. Do you want to kind of elaborate how that came into place and how that operates today?
Yeah, I mean, for our data governance, we just, we call it the Board Data Council, and so we have representatives from every division. We have a total of 15 divisions at the board. We discuss all things data. It's not just the traditional type of governance and policy. But I am the chair of it, but a lot of the decisions, especially on our governance policy, we want our governance body to actually eventually put a stamp on it. It's not just me, as Kirsten mentioned. We can't dictate what people do or not do, and we want people to actually want to do these things from the bottom of their heart. And talking about data governance, and actually, to be honest, there's really not a huge, when it comes to data governance challenges, I don't see there's a difference between private sector or public sector. And you can actually say, yep, it's difficult because we don't have profit lines. We don't have a profit center, right? We're not making money. But for those of you who are in the private sector, and when I was in the private sector, you can stretch it to say, well, yeah, the data governance, that gives you, think about the foregone revenue when something breaks, or think about, the opportunity cost savings that you can get. You can stretch it, and but I got plenty of those looks. You're just stretching it, trying to sell it. So I stopped quantifying, quote unquote, the return on investment when it comes to governance. And when it comes to the data governance, I also thought, the best way to actually talk about data is do not talk about data. Do not talk about data using data acronyms, using data words. That doesn't work. So use the business lines work, talk about their work. And they're going to bring up data. Trust me, everybody brings all the data headaches out. And let them talk about their data headaches. And we're just saying, how can we make the data management process better? And that's our definition of data governance. We're going to just make our data management, the data usage process better. And we're going to together figure that one out. And I also painted what I call it the nirvana of data governance for everybody to go along, which is eventually we work together to make data governance disappear. And what it means is not that we don't have data governance, it's going to become a day in, day out activities. For those of us, one example you can think about is when we commute to work. How many of you really think about, now that we're back to the office, so sometimes, right? You don't need to think about when you drive or take public transportation. You don't think that much like exactly which route I'm in, where do I turn? You already know that. It's already ingrained in your brain. And I'm hoping eventually data governance is as a part of a data usage, a part of the data management, that people don't have to think about it. And that's the nirvana. We're not there yet. I'm not saying we're there. We're not there yet. But I think that at least I get people to actually stop focusing on challenges, burden, but focus on something that we work together toward.
Making it more of a seamless process in the organization.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So my governance body, right, similar to Katherine's. I mean, I technically co-chair my data governance body with the CIO, although pretty much I have full autonomy over the data governance body. We have membership across all of our program offices. We have 13 program offices, so we have membership from all 13 program offices. We get pretty good participation across all those program offices. And I think, as many people have probably heard in the data governance space, I mean, you find your champions. Who are the people who are passionate? Let them model the behavior. And those that are sort of lagging behind eventually will come on board and say, I want to do what they're doing. I will say when I was at DHS doing data governance, I could get away with more scorecarding type things. DHS was more an environment that sort of encouraged that type of behavior. I would never be able to get away with that at an organization like FERC. I think largely just because the culture of the organization, it's a very collaborative relationship-based organization. So I don't think people would appreciate the scorecarding. But I will say that has worked well for me at organizations that allowed that. I mean, if someone sees that they're showing up as red on something, they're highly motivated to figure out how to turn yellow and green. But I will say at FERC, what has worked well is, okay, let me find the champions, the people who really do believe in this and find value in this, and let them be the leaders on this process. And we've been having pretty good success now in terms of building out our data cataloging. To Katherine's point, making sure that part of the cataloging effort, and this is my team pantry doing a lot of this, but making sure we're using the business language as we go through the cataloging effort. That means, we don't need to be talking about physical table names in databases. Rather, what is the business context, business use of this data set? Let's use that right language so people understand what the data is. That's been an education process for many people, particularly those who are more technical, who want to speak about, table names, column names, but trying to push them beyond that and say, no, but what is the business context for this data set? Let's use that language so people understand it, because we want people to know what ingredients are available to them to bake the cakes they're trying to bake. And so we've been having a lot of good success there. I think one of our metrics actually is around growth of our data catalog, and I think last I checked, just in this fiscal year, we're probably at about 70% growth in terms of where we were at the beginning of the fiscal year. But yeah, so my governance body, we meet monthly. Periodically, I get questions about, like, are we going to be done with this governance thing soon? Well, no, we'll never be done. Hopefully, though, it will be to a point where it is so seamless that you don't even realize it's happening anymore, but data governance will never be done. And frankly, data, I think I read an article once that sort of talked about how data is like language, and that language changes over time, right? And same with data. I'm sure we've all experienced, with those legacy systems, the way something was designed in a legacy system was related to the context of that time 10 or 20 years ago. And now we look at the data going, well, yeah, that kind of changed, and we don't really mean that anymore, but we've been using this field to now mean this. Okay, well, we kind of need to document that, because how are people going to know that at this point in time we actually kind of shifted it over a direction, and now we were originally intending it to mean this, and it kind of shifted with language and with priorities, but we never really documented that. We need to write that down so people know that from this point forward it really means something different than it did before that point. And I think people are starting to understand that, but it is definitely an education process.
Definitely. I know you talked about like the governance body set up in both of the organizations, and that was also a mandate from the Federal Data Strategy. Again, seems like you're definitely not doing it just for checking off the box, but doing it because you're seeing value, which is fantastic. Another area that I'm hearing the CDOs focus a lot of their time is like including your data strategy in either by itself a document or including it in your broader IT strategies. I know you both have slightly different stories and how that is situated today. I think, Katherine, you don't have a standalone data strategy. Well, Kirsten, you don't have sorry. Well, you do have a standalone data strategy. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, we have the board, at the board we have our strategic plan for the whole board, right, on our mission and mission advancement functions. Under the mission advance functions, we have, a strategy on our HR function, we have a structure on our data strategy, and a separate technology strategy. So on our data strategy, definitely a multi-year strategy, and how we set it up, we currently, in our data strategy from 2022 to 2025, and we set up some strategic goals, objectives. So I see data as a business operation. So, business operations, the traditional one, when you hear the word of operation, you think about people, process, and technology, right? And technology, since there's a technology strategy taking care of it, I took that component out. And that leaves me with still two components, and I added a third one. So in my data strategy, I'm actually talking about people, process, and innovation. And the people part, we're talking about how do we, that's actually talking about data strategy. The first thing I'm talking about is actually people. Talking about the data people. How do we enable our people? How do we expand our people? And how do we make the non-data professionals still part of the data journey? And process is really just about data governance is a process, architecture roadmap is a process, and how do we share knowledge, that's a process, that's a process. And the innovation, how do we use data to drive innovation? How do we use innovation to drive data? So it's both ways. It's not just about data itself, but how data usage as well. And in addition to the strategic goals, we also have some very solid action items. We call it, here's a minted strategy. Then we have what we call the tearaway action items. Because if you don't have any action items, strategy is a nice piece of paper sitting on the wall. And so the way we call it tearaway action items is because, oh, trust me, something is going to fail. And most of them are probably going to fail on the first try anyway. So we have these actions, and we're saying it works great. We still tear away because we can move on to something new. If it doesn't work, we tear away that action item and put in something new to try the new actions to actually keep the strategy, keep us making progress to achieve our goals. So that's our approach. And actually, we talked about some success stories and talking about open data. One highlight, one success, we're still in the process of working on it. And one thing that I'll give you one example from our strategy and action item is we're creating what we call a new data download program. As I mentioned earlier, we're making data available. Data is downloadable on our website. And what you don't know is there's a whole bunch of processes behind the scenes before we put data on our website. And what you also don't know, the technology in there is really old, and we're actually making it better. So there are three parts about associated with this particular action plan, which is we fix the back end, the plumbing part. We fix that. That's easy. We are also on the front end is how do we actually make that data download easier, or not only just download the raw data, but also deliver the data through our some visualization tools up front. For those of you who are econ or business geek, you might have heard the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank has this website called FRED. And you can go there to download data and actually just look at the data and run reports on data through visualization tools. Very easy, so we're teaming up with them to actually put a lot of the board data, have the board data to be delivered through that site. And meanwhile, we're also engaged in public. This is not only, it's required by law, it is what we wanted to happen. Last year, we engaged hundreds of people through surveys and focus groups to really hear what people think our data download program works, what are the data that's people are looking for, and whether this data, even with the existing data we're allowed to publish, how can we make things better? So that's one example. There's 8 others right now, but I'm not going to go through that.
Yeah, and you kind of addressed my follow-up question. I was going to say, hey, give us an example of what your next strategic effort is. But pass it over to you, Kirsten.
Right, right. So kind of as we've talked about, the differences of our organizational structures and where we sit in the organization kind of plays into how we've developed our data strategies. So again, being the first CDO, we didn't have an enterprise data strategy before I existed. Also, as part of the Evidence Act, one of the requirements, if you read it, is that CDOs are supposed to create an open data plan and append it to their agency's Information Resources Management Strategic Plan. However, the way that the previous requirements for the IRM strategic plans have been designed, really only the large cabinet level agencies have been required to create IRM strategic plans. So those of us in the small agency space were sort of left with this conundrum of we're supposed to create an open data plan and append it to our IRM strategic plans, and we don't have IRM strategic plans. So what happens next? So what I ended up doing, because I work for the CIO, I worked with my CIO and said, I need to create this open data plan. Also, I want to create a data strategy. Also, why don't we sit down and create a collective, collaborative IRM strategic plan that serves the purpose of kind of an IT strategic plan? So I worked with my CIO, and we put in place the IRM strategic plan that's also kind of double titled as an IT strategic plan. I embedded a few of the mission goals and objectives into that for the data strategy specifically, and I tried to keep it very simple. So really, the main goals within that that I embedded into that broader plan were related to maturing data stewardship. And within that, then the metrics are really around ensuring, PRA compliance, ensuring data management, data catalog growth, and then improving data-driven decision-making, which was really about delivering our cloud analytics platform. So I tried to keep it pretty simple around that. It allowed us to create our IAM strategic plan, and then I could also create my open data plan that I could append to it. So it just, given where FERC was in the maturity of those things, it kind of just made sense to partner with the CIO and create like the shared IRM strategic plan, embed the data, mission goals, and objectives within that. And so that got good buy-in then, so with that we could move forward. So that was kind of how I approached creating our enterprise data strategy, and it also helped create a really good partnership with the CIO, so that people could sort of see how our mission goals, objectives work together.
So 2 very different ways in how your data strategies are situated, but what's common is like you're talking about your stakeholder engagement and the collaboration across the organization to make those successful. And thanks for highlighting some of your strategic areas, because you talked about open data, cloud modernization, some of those exciting things that are lining up for you. Katherine, you touched a little bit about data upskilling and how you're helping your organization continue to learn the greatest and latest in data. And that's another challenge that we hear a lot from the CDOs is like, how do we continue to make sure that our workforce is, whether you call it data fluent, data literate, or has the right data acumen as they continue to function? Are there certain programs and initiatives that you have in place that either of you might want to opine on?
So I'm going to brag a little bit about Federal Reserve. So in the Federal Reserve, for those of you who pays attention to our chair speeches, and you're going to hear one thing, and our governor's speeches, you're going to hear one thing over and over and over. We make decisions based on the data, right? And so, you know, our organization is very much data-driven. And now, I'm not saying we're doing everything perfectly with data, but you know, data, it is in the back of our senior leaders' mind, in our principals' mind, in our senior leaders, in a lot of people's mind. And talking about, you know, I know some organizations that like to say data literacy, you know, upskilling. If we use the word data literacy, that's considered to be an insult to a lot of people in our organization, right? So people are saying, you mean I'm illiterate in data? So we scratch that term. We don't even produce that. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean we don't need to improve our data knowledge. So, you know, our metadata management, yeah, it's not really just metadata management. It is about, you know, letting people understand that data, let people gain that knowledge of data better, right? So, and also we're talking about one thing we're actually focusing on, not just so much, you know, on the data user side, that a lot, you know, the users, they have, you know, we have 600-700 economists, PhD economists, so they know how to use data. We have a ton of analysts, so they know how to use data. We just need to make sure that the data knowledge is accurate, can be delivered right to their hands. But meanwhile, we also have people managing data, what I call them the data professionals, whether it's analysts or data librarians or data managers, I call them data professionals. So one thing actually, I set a goal to actually think about how we improve our data professionals' career path. And when I say career, it's not just career ladders, it's career lattices. And how do we expand our careers? And you know, I like, as a CDO, I said, data is fun. To me, it's fun. I want to make sure all data professionals think that way and think about all sorts of different opportunities in there. And also set a pretty big high bar in terms of skills. You know, it's not, you want to be a successful data professional, just knowing you're technical, not good enough. Just know you have your data terms, not good enough. Just know the business, still not good enough. You're a good Agile master, you know, Scrum master, still not good enough. You need all of them. And now, that doesn't mean that everybody has to be the unicorn to have all of that, but think about the whole data professional workforce, to think about the whole team. That is the whole team, the data professional workforce together. We need to have all of that. And to be able to really, for people to think that we can truly deliver the value and fill in some of the gaps that people are not willing to do or don't have time to do. And you know, that we call it the 4 quadrants of skills. We're really trying, I started with my team, small team to start, and we're really trying to push that to the rest of the board. And you know, the way that I see it is we're building a data professional workforce here for the board. Eventually, not necessarily a team of superstars, but a superstar team or a superstar workforce in our organization.
Thanks, Katherine, for those details. Kirsten, I know we talked a little bit about data upskilling and data literacy or data acumen. What are some of the other challenges that you're seeing in your role today? And if you want to comment on any other challenges around data sharing, or we talked about governance and literacy.
I mean, there's definitely still the challenge around just data education, and then yes, being careful about the terminology used around that. But just making sure that people fully understand, and I could say this applies to every place I've ever worked, in that I feel like we're in this generational shift in terms of people understanding that the bulk of the work that we do is underpinned by data. But many people still don't fully understand that many people still say they're not data people, and yet there they are analyzing all sorts of things to make assessments. I mean, like people at FERC often talk about how they're sort of like a law firm because of the number of lawyers that we have. And yet, okay, if you're a lawyer, you're doing a lot of e-discovery. That means you're staring at a lot of data. you probably just you haven't really realized that it's data, but it's data. You're looking at data. So there's definitely the challenges of just people understanding that what they're doing is working with data every day, and then helping them understand how to, to sort of the data cataloging type work, like how to bucket that into useful groupings so that we can do effective data cataloging, and helping people understand that the way you define a data asset is not, a database is not necessarily a data asset. The database is really just the mechanism that holds it, but you might have many data assets within a particular database that are serving different business functions, serving different communities. You need to be able to articulate what those different pieces are, and helping people stop thinking about just like, don't just give me a database name. What are the unique data assets within that database that are serving the unique business functions that you're attempting to perform? So there's kind of just the education around that. So at FERC, while we've been building out our analytics platform, we rolled out kind of a broad data science training program, and I initially used my data governance body as the way to get the word out, mostly because I didn't want to do like a huge organizational blast, but more just let me find the friendly people who were interested in this program. And I was actually fascinated that like 80 people raised their hand asking to participate in a data science program. So that was fantastic. And then so really we just used the LinkedIn Learning platform. It's a fantastic platform that's pretty low cost. And the Office of Management and Budget had actually created like a curated set of courses from LinkedIn Learning. So I just borrowed from their curated set of courses. I grouped them into kind of topic areas, and I personally ended up leading lunch and learns because I wanted people to see me directly engaging with staff talking about these important concepts. And we got a lot of really great conversations going, and also helped me get a better sense of really like what are the actual things happening down at the program office level where people are trying to interact with data, because that gave me a better sense of how do we need to drive our priorities forward. And so we actually did 2 years of that, and I think now with our the maturity of our analytics platform, and we're trying to bring people into that analytics platform, we're now looking at doing kind of deeper level education and training around different tools and technologies within the stack. But it's just doing that sort of broad data science training, doing that. The lunch and learns has been a really great way to help people better understand these things. We also have, with our data stewardship framework, we've been rolling out monthly office hours, and I'm surprised at how well those are attended. People are really starting to engage in those conversations, and people, the data stewardship part of the strategy I think is important, because I wanted people to understand that when I came in, that again, to my earlier comment, I'm not taking people's data away. In fact, I will never be able to be an expert in all of the data across the organization. I need people at the program offices who have the subject matter expertise to act as the data stewards for the individual data assets, but I need to make sure that they understand what their roles and responsibilities are. I need to train them on that. I need them to understand. So in our data stewardship framework, we were a little cute. We created the 4 C's. So capture, communicate, check, collaborate. But it's really helped people understand, okay, if you're a data steward for a data asset, these are your responsibilities. That basically means that you need to be documenting the data asset. You need to be monitoring quality of the data asset. You need to be communicating effectively around the data asset. If something changes about the data asset, you need to be telling the users of this data asset what has changed. I don't want to be hearing stories that someone had built a really great dashboard off of your data asset and it broke, and they were toiling away for 8 months trying to figure out, only to find out through a hallway conversation that, oh, the schema changed. Well, that would have been like a 5-minute fix had that been effectively communicated. So helping people understand those responsibilities, and the office hours have really helped that as well to kind of break down that issue. But
yeah, great tips on
capture, check, communicate, collaborate.
All the cute acronyms and abbreviations. But you're absolutely right. I mean, we're living at a time where like we can no longer think that we're not data people. It seems like everybody's a data person right now. Think about like the smartwatches, the retina scans, like, our dashboards. Like, there's so much data happening around us that we cannot think that we're not data people anymore. I know we're getting close to the end of this. I have one final question for all of you.
Do you want to open up the audience questions?
Yeah, are there any questions in the audience here?
I have a quick question about developing your data strategy. So data strategy is super important, and I'm wondering how you go about developing it and then looking at implementing it to execute on the strategy.
Either.
Right. I mean, I think for me, again, because of where I sit in the organization and reporting to the CIO, it was very much about showing my partnership and collaboration with the CIO, but then also making sure that we had those key data-specific goals embedded in there. And so, you know, ours were really around maturing data stewardship and improving data-driven decision-making. And I tried to keep it very simple so that it didn't sort of overwhelm anyone. And everyone pretty much kind of got on board with the concept of, you know, yes, we absolutely want to continue maturing data stewardship. We want to empower all of our data users and our stewards across the organization. And we also want to make sure we're providing them the effective tools to be able to work together. So I tried to keep it pretty simple so that we didn't get lost in the weeds of like getting into master data management and metadata and all those things. I mean, those can be aspects of the strategy that we as data practitioners know we're going to get into, but I don't need to spell that out in a strategy because that can scare people off. But I mean, you have more of a standalone data strategy, so might have taken a different approach to that.
Yeah, ours was a journey, a long journey to get to where we want to be. The method we're actually using, since we're talking about data, right? We're data people. So I use data to develop the data strategy. Gather the information, that's data, and you know, analyze the information, that's data analysis, and bring that information and to, you know, I leverage the Board Data Council, our governance, but they're not just governance body, they're data councils, so bring that information to them. So they actually hear not from me where we want it to be. It's actually from all divisions, people to actually tell us where we should go, where are the gaps, where are the pain points. And once we have, you know, we spend more time, you know, gathering the data, telling the data story. And, you know, it's only like, well, in government sense, that's a high speed, you know, in a month or so that we were able to actually identify, you know, naturally come out the themes and the strategic goals and objectives.
I know we have maybe 4 minutes or 2 minutes. Okay. All right. Two more questions. Well, maybe
there's one question.
Thanks. It's exciting to hear about all the foundational things you guys are putting into place, things that sounds like you've been wanting to do for a long time, and you know the agency has needed for a long time. But you're also having to operate the agencies every day with new things happening. Question for Katherine about how is maybe you can comment on FedNow. I think FedNow is an exciting development that has significant ramifications for how you're managing data in very real time. And you know, sort of how that's affecting your role.
Not that much, actually. Like you said, you actually said it, you know, once you have the foundational thing in, or at least we're working on it, FedNow itself, it's a system, right? We have a gazillion other systems too. FedNow it's a lot of data, but it's not, to be honest, at this point, not yet, because it just started, it's not really the largest data either. And so it may become the largest database we ever have to manage. But that's the thing is, you know, we want, data is data. The data usage can be unique, depends on the nature of the data, depends on the nature of the system. But in terms of the data management, the data governance, I don't see that's a hugely different from how we want it to be better. And you know, the same thing, you identify the foundational roles and responsibilities. You make sure there's data quality on it. You make sure people understand the content and context of the data before people start using it. And leverage the right technology. I think that's important too.
Thanks, Katherine. So one last rapid-fire question for both of you, and considering, you know, this is a Women in Data panel, what advice do you both have for other aspiring female leaders looking up to you?
Go ahead.
I mean, for female leaders, I mean, don't shy away from the conversation. feel you are empowered to be at the table. You know, don't question your ability to be there. I know a lot of women suffer from imposter syndrome. Don't let yourself feel that way. Or maybe think of that as a good thing and say, like, to drive you forward, but recognize that you are absolutely welcome at the table. You have space at the table. Make room for yourself at that table. I mean, I'm already 6 feet tall, and I definitely sometimes wear intentionally wear high heels to like make sure that like if I'm feeling like I'm having that imposter syndrome, like this is my way to feel like I'm at the table. I'm gonna look down at people at the table to make sure. But then just sort of generally speaking, I mean, the CDO role is interesting in the sense that like, I mean, I haven't written code in a long time. That is not something I do anymore. And we tend to think of the CDO role as a technologist in many ways, but we are not. We are communicators, we are collaborators, we are relationship builders. So really actively build your networks, build your relationships. I mean, to the earlier data governance conversation, like yes, I have a data governance body, but the way that is successful is that I have coffee with all of my data governance members regularly, one-on-one, to make sure I'm constantly maintaining those relationships. I never want any of my governance body members to be caught off guard by anything we say in a meeting, so I'm constantly sort of, I say to my staff, like, lay your breadcrumbs. Like, make sure we are always laying our breadcrumbs because we don't want any of our partners to ever be caught off guard. We want them to be our champions. So make sure that you're building your communication skills and your collaboration skills, because by the time you get to this role, like as much as we love the technology because it's fun, we're not the people doing it. Our staff are. We're the ones paving the way to make sure that they can do that cool technology stuff. So that means we have to be building the relationships and communicating effectively and being good partners.
Great advice.
Yeah.
Get your seat at the table, communicate, and continue to have coffee with the right stakeholders. Katherine, take us home.
Two things. I think one thing is very much related. Don't profile ourselves. And I know other people do, but let us don't profile ourselves. That's number one. Number two, don't scope of ourselves as a CDO. And I'm not saying you got to get into everybody's business and you're going to get kicked out of that room, but think about anything that you can help. And don't say that's not a CDO job. You know, I participate, I contribute to a whole bunch of things: technology, talent management, risk management, anything that's, if I can help with data, that's my job. And I will do it. And even if it's something else, something that other people won't do it, I will do it. I'll get some of my team members to help me with it too. And to be honest, you know, data is embedded in every single line of business anyway. So that help really, that kind of, you know, just go for it and help others. Really help establish and expanding the CDO role.
Great advice. Thank you, Katherine and Kirsten, for sharing all of your experiences today. And thank you, audience, for all the fantastic Q&A. So thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
Really great panel. Thank you so much.